are you today? It is such a gift to get to be here on LBN. Obviously, we don't really have any idea exactly who is out there. Maybe just my mother is sitting there. But there's some others of you out there that love talking and thinking about God. Then I'm thankful. And we're having God Talk now. I preach here at LBN. I have a little God Talk podcast that goes out every morning, Monday to Friday. It's 8 or 10 minutes. And we're beginning to get a website now that is going to be graceforce.info. Beginning to put some things on there. I'm hoping we'll begin to be a blessing to the world. We have a year before we can travel again, looks like, and do our quiet hour meetings around the world. So in the meantime, we're trying to find ways to make a difference. And if you're bottled up and cooped up at home, we're glad if we can bring some of God to you. Find us. I also preach often at the La Sierra Spanish Church. You can go to the website there and live stream. Many times we're there. We're doing a week of prayer next week with that. So I finished up a week of prayer the other day with them online, and I'm going to preach this last one here with you. The story of Peter. There was friends of mine who are self-supporting missionaries in the Philippines, a ministry called PAMAS. So they have a helicopter, then they got some planes, and they're just great, great, great people. And they told me a story that one time, I don't know if it was a helicopter or the plane, I don't remember that part of the story, probably a helicopter, and the patient was unconscious. So they took that patient and strapped them into a gurney and laid them and tied them into the skid underneath the helicopter. Yeah, it was a helicopter. So then they took off. They get 5,000 or whatever feet up in the sky coming out of the mountain to the hospital. That guy wakes up. And he's up under a helicopter. He did not know anything about that. And he looks over the side and says, whoa, he's thousands of feet up in the sky. And he goes a little berserk, and he somehow climbs out of the gurney that he is tied to and climbs up that skid and pulls open the door and tries to get in and get that wheel and go back down. Crazy. This poor pilot, my friend Dwayne, is trying to fly this helicopter and wrestle this guy out. Craziness. It's fear. How do you deal with fear when you're trying to do something great for God? And you know the story of Peter in Matthew chapter 14. It says, about 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came to them walking on the water. You think about that. We know the story. They had not gone through this yet. When the disciples saw him, they screamed in terror, thinking he was a ghost. But Jesus said, it's all right. I am here. Don't be afraid. Then Peter said, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you by walking on the water. All right, come. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. Now you know that he eventually fell and all of that. So I preached a version of this as a very young pastor, but it's become famous now by John Ortberg, who wrote a book. If you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat. It's one or the other. Most of us want to do both. We want to be in the boat and walk on water and have the thrill of that. You got to get out of the boat. Let go of the boat. Walk on water. So you can break this down into the first thing is the call. Jesus is always calling, come. I wish I had pictures. I could show you the picture of Jesus inviting you to come. Come, Peter. Inviting ordinary people, Peter's ordinary, to do extraordinary things. For my parents, the call came at 28 years old to leave what was familiar, grandparents and pastoring churches in California, and take 3 little boys on a ship over to Thailand. Ordinary people, just pastoring small churches here in California. They'll do something extraordinary, be missionaries for 15 years in Thailand. I began to do missions. Just an ordinary pastor, pastoring in a church. Maybe a good church and doing well by most people's standards, but pretty ordinary. When all of a sudden I began to do missions, and I got a call to go preach in Thailand, a call to go preach in Philippines, a call to go to India. I began to do some things that I had no idea I was going to do. And then I got a call from the president of our division in India, Ron Watts, and he said, Pastor Dan, we're going to do Net 98 with Dwight Nelson, and our college needs a satellite dish back in the big, huge ones. How much? $4,500. The same day, the president of our university in the Philippines, where I had just done the week of prayer, called and said, can you help us get a satellite dish so we can have our Net 98 in our college? Several thousand students will see it. $9,000 Friday. Somehow in and around getting a sermon done and preaching by Sunday afternoon, I had the $9,000. I got called, come. And over the years, God began to call and say, come preach over here. 1,000 people in a basketball stadium, 2,000 over here to this one, 5,000 in a place. Last year, I got to go to Youth Congress in Mountain View College, 7,000 sitting in front of me and 20,000 sitting all over the campground. Scared to death. God said, come, get out of the boat. Watch the show with Melinda Gates and David Letterman. If you have a chance to watch it, it's on Netflix. Great interview. Melinda Gates was, I suppose, special, but in a sense, ordinary. Got her degree, computer science, got her master's, got her MBA, went eventually to work for Microsoft, worked there 9 years, ends up sitting at a dinner with Bill Gates. He invites her out to dinner, and she's married to one of the richest men of the world. And I'm reading her book. She has a new book out. I watched her TED Talk. She began to feel a call to not just sit here with all these billions, and she calls it a gigantic house, but to do something with the money. The call came. Get out of the boat. Began to do something to empower our women, to be able to control how big their families were, begin to invest in them, begin to help make a difference for women. Great interview. Listen. Got her husband to do it now. They have this huge foundation for 20 years. Bill and Melinda Gates announced today that they're going to do something to build factories, to try to do something about the coronavirus. Come out of the boat. Don't just sit there in the boat. Do something with what you have. John Ortberg tells a story of preaching about the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. 3 ladies came to him and said, we would like to talk to you. Came to the office. We heard your sermon, thy kingdom, what happens in heaven should now happen on earth. We think we should do something. What do you want to do? Well, we want to go save all the babies in Africa that are dying from HIV. 12 million babies or whatever it is. I said, boy, that's a big mission for 3 ladies in San Francisco, Menlo Park. He said, why don't you start with something local here first and kind of build way up to that? He said, over on this side of the freeway, we have money, we have beautiful schools with beautiful physical plant. Across the way, black and Spanish kids, poor, no trees on the campus, there's no grass, there's no playground equipment. I want to do something for them. Okay. And to make a long story short, they got, I think, 100 people. They got trees donated. They went and planted 100 trees one Saturday, rolled out sod and grass. They got somebody to donate $20,000 for a playground equipment. Starbucks gave coffee for the day. Anyway, it's a great day. Come, get out of the boat. Do something. Bruce Wilkinson, who wrote the Prayer of Jabez, wrote another book called Dream Giver. God is a God who has a dream. He said everybody has a calling to come. You're sitting at a restaurant. The guy was arguing with that. I think that's some people, but not everybody. Bruce Wilkinson said, let me show you. He called the waitress over. He said, what would you like to do if you could do whatever you really wanted to do? Well, I'm going to be a nurse. Why aren't you a nurse? He said, I don't have any money. Don't have enough money. Can't afford it. Got 2 kids. So he said, who could watch your kids while you go to school? I suppose my mother could. A minute later, they heard her go over to somebody at the next table and say, I'm going to be a nurse. Everybody has a calling. And God says, come, get out of the boat. Let's go do something extraordinary for God. What's God inviting you today? Come out of the boat. What does the boat stand for? Boat stands for whatever is comfortable, feels safe, familiar, people you know, community, habits, your job, beliefs you have. It's comfortable, safe. And God comes along and says, let that go. I got something else for you, extraordinary for you to do. It's not comfortable when I got asked to go preach to big crowds. Had to write a new sermon every day. I don't have any sermons ready for that. Fly over there and every morning get up, write a sermon, preach it that night. No chance to learn from anybody. Got time to make appeals. Pastor Dan, you need to invite them to come forward. And I want to do that. Afraid no one would come. And I would say, okay, please now, if you want to give your life to Jesus, please come forward. Nobody would come. And I would be a failure and send me home. Still scares me. I've learned to do it. Get out of the boat. What's comfortable. How many times people have caught me at the end of a sermon, say, Pastor Dan, I want you to bring you to my Bible class, or can you go speak for the pastors over here? How long do I have? Well, maybe 5 minutes. Went to have worship one morning, and they said, we're going to dedicate the land for a new building. Gave me the program. My name's on the program. So what do you mean my name? Said, you're going to have the speech. It's happened many times now. You're living out on the edge in this adventure. Come out of the boat. Come out of what's familiar. Begin to raise money. It's hard. I was a young pastor. They invited me to be part of a group that were casting out demons from people. My evangelist was in my church casting demons out. Finally, someone said, you should invite the pastor to come. So here I am, a young pastor. Never heard of this, did not want to do this. So we sit in a room with this guy, we lay him down, we read Bible promises, we prayed, and then the preacher began to pray the demons to come out. I had no idea what was going to happen. I don't know if demons were going to come out or voices or what was going to. So I grabbed the couch. Then I thought, boy, I don't think the couch is going to help me. But that was my boat. Whatever makes you familiar and feel safe to say, okay, I don't want to rock the boat. I have my beliefs. Don't mess with me. I've got it. And God says, come, let's walk on water. Do something extraordinary for God. There's always fear. God is always asking people to step over the side of the boat and step onto water. Do something that makes no sense. It's just afraid. We all want to be on solid ground. I was 16 years old in high school. My roommate in Singapore wanted to take flying lessons. I went with him when he started to learn to land. Why did I do that? Boy, we bounced around. It was terrible. I finally said, let me out. I want to be on solid ground, not this kid learning to fly. I made a list, my David Letterman list of 10 things. As I look back at my life, moments of fear. I'm just going to read them to you. I don't have them all memorized. Number 1, Knott's Berry Farm. They took me and they put me in an accelerator. Straight up, straight down. Terrifying. Number 2, the time the demons called me at 2:30 in the morning. Number 8, the time one of my church members was dying of cancer in Chicago, and someone loaned him a brand new baby blue Porsche. They live here now. And I visited him. He said, Dan, come, take a ride with me. We're going around 80, 100 miles an hour around the cloverleaf turns. I had no idea cars could do that. And I finally realized he doesn't care if he dies. He's going to die in a few weeks anyway. I wanted to live. I was scared. Let me out. The day, number 7, the day we went scuba diving in Cozumel, and it said, we're going to dive a wall today. Usually you dive in Catalina out here 30, 40, 50 feet. If you mess up your buoyancy, the worst you'll do is hit the sand down there. You'll stop. But if you're in a wall, it goes down 1,000 feet. That's different. And I thought, what if I mess my buoyancy up? Went like a rock. Turned out to be okay. But I was scared. Snake show in Thailand. My brother and I, we were watching this snake show. We sat in the very last row. The snakes were down there in the little area. Cobras and vipers. All of a sudden, they had a little stick and they flicked and it threw that thing up and it landed right in front of us. Oh, I about died. There's a rope with a little knot on the head. Scared me to death. Not very nice. Time we had the bee sting in Thailand, I was an hour and a half from a hospital and knew I could die. The time at 31 years old when I thought maybe I had cancer at 31. Terrifying. Number 2, standing outside the door of Hilda's apartment with an engagement watch in my pocket, wondering if she would say yes or no. Number 1, I put down the first one. I wore a hairpiece for 20 years, from 30 to 50. I turned 50. I took it off on a vacation. I came back from vacation. We had the Easter pageant at La Sierra University, and I had to take it off and stand in front of 1,500 people. Will you love me anyway? Fear. All the way through the Bible, before people did something great, there was always a moment of fear. Noah, he's going to save 8 people, but before, you got to walk into a boat in front of everybody while they're eating, drinking, and having a party. And you have to walk into a boat in the middle of a desert, 500 miles from any ocean, and no one has ever seen rain before. Fear. Moses has to take his rod and throw it down and becomes a snake, and then God says, pick up the snake. You come down and pick up the snake. You turn it back into the stick, then I'll pick it up. No, you pick up the snake. Elijah called fire down on the rock and the water and the sacrifice. Said, God, maybe I've prayed before and you didn't always do what I thought you were going to do. God, let's go practice this the day before. And I'll pray and you send fire. Let's just get this thing worked out, God. Don't you leave me hanging in front of the whole crowd, Father. God. Frightening to pray in front of everybody and say, God, if you're ever going to do it, do it now. Jehoshaphat, surrounded by enemies, goes to the temple and lays it before God and says, God, what are you going to do? We have no power to deal with this enemy, God. Our eyes are on you. God says, the battle is the Lord's. Put the choir out in front. No weapons, no swords, no spears, no guns, no bombs, no tanks. Choir, that's a good idea, God. Let's go out there and just sing to these enemies. Why don't you come down and sing, God? That's a good idea. You sing. We'll stand behind you. You go sing. Even Jesus, scared, he's human, to go through the cross, saves the whole world, but before he's scared. Take this cup from me. Scared. But you think about it, without faith and without letting go, then none of those things ever would have happened. There would have been no boat saving the world and keeping the world going. There would have been no Moses leading people to the promised land. No Jehoshaphat having the battle. No God sending the fire down. There would be no LLBN. There would be no music. There would be no books written. There would be no marriages. There would be no schools built. Those moments of fear where someone says, step out of the boat. Let's go do something extraordinary for God. It's all by faith. After a moment of fear, and then you walk on the water. I was always afraid of what I would have to give up for God. I was 18, good kid, religious leader, father's a pastor, missionary. Someone asked me in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, if you were to die tonight, do you know that you would have eternal life? Never heard of that before. I wanted that. But as I knelt down to decide what to do about that, I had a boat. I had a pretty girlfriend, blonde girlfriend. I was afraid God would take that away and make me marry someone horrible, keep me humble. I was one of the good students in school, always fighting with these 3 or 4 guys to get the best grade, put my name at the top. I was afraid God would take that away. I wasn't a superstar athlete, but in my little school, I was one of the best. I was on every team, on every team of everything. Won a lot of games in my life. I was afraid God would take sports away. Afraid to let go. Get out on the water, walk to Jesus. Finally had to just do it. God, I want you. If I have to let any of that go, take whatever you want. He didn't take any of that, but it broke something. And I've had to do that little battle over and over again. You get comfortable, then God has to do something to break the hold of that boat. Face your fears and go out and walk to Jesus. Do something extraordinary for God. I want to stay safe. How do you learn to do it? I suppose we'd have to say, remember what God has done for you and for others in the past. Peter had been walking with Jesus and he had seen. You just go through the book of Matthew, the chapters before this story. Jesus had heard, Peter had heard the voice of God at Jesus' baptism. This is my beloved Son. Seen changing the water to wine. Seen blind people raised from the dead. Food multiplied to thousands of people. He'd seen all those things. Doesn't always have to happen to you. If God does it for someone else, you can say, if he did it for them, it can happen to me. God did it for Peter, he can do it for me. Remember how God has done miracles for you. I forget all the time. LOBN, wonderful stories in 20-some years. Probably will keep doing it again. God is not going to give up. He's not going to forget about it all of a sudden. Peter was not Billy Graham. If God's willing to do it for an ordinary person like Peter, probably do it for people like you and for me. The question is, do you trust him? The lady that's given me a lot of money for some of my projects around the world died last year. And I began to despair a little. She wouldn't be good for 3 or 4 churches a year. How am I going to do this? And said that to a couple of people who had been going with me, and he said, Pastor Dan, God is not going to stop. He's done it before. He'll do it again. If he says, come out of the boat, we will walk on water again. Thought of a story of Michael Jordan. Came down to one of the championships. We came down to the last game. And we were losing. And Michael Jordan was tired of giving the ball to other players because he's always double teamed. And he would give the ball to other players and they would not make the shot. So he wasn't giving the ball to anybody. Just fighting against the team by himself. 1 against 5. 4th quarter, Phil Jackson calls out timeout. Says to Michael Jordan, you can't keep going 1 against 2, 1 against 3, 1 against 5. We're going to lose. Who's open? If you're being double teamed, someone is open. Who's open? John Paxson, yes. 6'2" white guard. Michael Jordan began to drive to the basket and then pass to Paxson. Paxson began to shoot. Paxson scored 20 points in the 4th quarter. Now he's, I think, president of the Bulls. Trust him. Jackson said, trust him. Trust God. He's done it before. Trust him. Get out of the boat. Go to Jesus. And obviously, the sermon is always keep your eyes on Jesus. And I have learned by personal testimony, whenever I begin to sink, whenever things begin to go bad, it's always because I took my eyes off of Jesus, began to worry, what's going to happen? We're not going to have enough money. We always have negative people around who will say, we don't have enough money. We've never done it that way before. It's going to rain. I don't think that's going to work. I don't think you can do it. And you have to take those dark voices of darkness, and I've had them in my life, who just somehow want to put you down and you can't do it. And you begin to doubt yourself. You forget what God has done all the way through. And you're in the boat. You have to just take those voices of darkness out and say, keep your eyes on Jesus. Go. Now, my friends, a couple questions before we're done. Do you have to walk on water in order to be saved? Did Peter end up actually walking on water, or did he just sink and Jesus carried him back to the boat? Can you just believe in Jesus and get forgiveness and grace and go to heaven? Or you're going to have to walk on water. Desire of Ages says that Jesus walked hand in hand with Peter. Peter walked on water. His eyes were on Jesus. And I'm going to take a stand that everybody's going to have to walk on water in order to be saved. We're going to walk on water. We're going to let go of the boat. If Jesus says come, you're going to come. Non-Christians can be in the boat. You can do sports and be a non-Christian. You can do your job and be a non-Christian. You can be married and be a non-Christian. Where Jesus makes a difference is to get out of the boat and go be with Jesus and do extraordinary things for God. There's no faith in staying in the boat. We're saved by faith and faith alone. And if you go to Revelation, it's pretty clear in the book of Revelation, we're going to stand on the sea of glass. It says all are going to stand on the sea of glass. It may look like glass, but it's water. Every single person is going to be there. And that people say, well, that's in heaven. No, that's not heaven yet. That's Revelation 15. We haven't had Revelation 16, 17, 18, and 19 yet. 7 last plagues and all the rest. These are people so committed to Jesus. It's as if they are standing on the sea of glass, walking on water. They're here. And you think about going to heaven, we're going to come on a cloud. What is a cloud made out of? Air and water. Every single person who's going to go to heaven is going to go on a cloud, eyes on Jesus. We're all going to walk on water and live by faith and faith alone. You think about the cross. It's all the cross. Paul says, I want nothing except to believe in the cross. You cannot mix a little holding onto the boat and going to Jesus. It's all the cross. We're saved by faith and not by works. You cannot mix it. It dishonors God if you try to mix it. It's both. Last question, is it worth it? Is it worth it to get out of the boat and walk to Jesus? And I can just tell you from my personal story, those times when you get out of the boat and go and do something extraordinary with Jesus become what you remember. They become the ice cream in your life. They become the photo album of experiences in your life. And you come back together with a bunch of friends and they say, remember when we walked on water. Remember we did that mission trip. Remember when that happened. This is God talk.